Britain's most famous gated community is in trouble tonight. The residents of numbers 10 and 11 broke the laws they made for the rest of us during an unforgettable period when we weren't allowed to attend funerals and christenings, let alone birthday parties. They did so despite this being the most heavily policed street in the country, and today the police issued them with fixed penalty notices. Once upon a time, before the 24th of February, when Russia invaded Ukraine, today's news might have heightened the chorus for resignations from inside the Tory party. But not today. In the last hour, the Prime Minister has apologised, paid his fine, and made clear that he wasn't resigning. Here's our political editor, Gary Gibbon.
The police say they broke the COVID laws they brought in. Both the Prime Minister and the Chancellor received fixed penalty notices. For Boris Johnson, more could be on the way. Both men told the Commons they had not broken the rules.
All guidance was followed completely during number 10.
I did not attend any parties.
Today's fixed penalty notices are believed to relate to what happened after this school visit on Boris Johnson's birthday in 2020. Between 2 and 3 that afternoon, in the room where the Cabinet normally meets, there was a much more informal gathering. Beer, soft drinks and party food was laid out, and the police may have been helped by images of the gathering snapped by the number 10 official photographer, including one, it said, of the Prime Minister holding a can of beer. At the time, the first lockdown was still in place, rules had been softened, but indoor social gatherings were banned, and the Department for Health was still pumping out that message.
I urge everyone to continue to show restraint and respect the rules which are designed to keep us all safe.
Scotland's First Minister Nicola Sturgeon tweeted, "Boris Johnson must resign. He broke the law and repeatedly lied to Parliament about it." Wales's First Minister Mark Drakeford tweeted, "I don't see how someone in this position can carry on." The Labour leader said it was a slap in the face to those who'd made sacrifices obeying lockdown laws.
The guilty men are the Prime Minister and the Chancellor. They've dishonoured all of that sacrifice. They've dishonoured their office. This is the first time in the history of our country that a Prime Minister has been found to be in breach of the law. And then he lied repeatedly to the public about it. Britain deserves better. They have to go.
Rishi Sunak and Boris Johnson should resign immediately, and if they don't, the Speaker of the House of Commons should recall Parliament immediately so there can be a vote of no confidence.
In the last hour, the Prime Minister, who had hoped to get some rest at Chequers over Easter, made this statement.
Thank you very much for coming. Today I've received a fixed penalty notice from the Metropolitan Police relating to an event in Downing Street on the 19th of June 2020. And let me say immediately that I've paid the fine and I once again offer a full apology. And in a spirit of openness and humility, I want to be completely clear about what happened on that date. My day began shortly after 7 a.m. and I chaired 8 meetings in number 10, including the Cabinet Committee deciding COVID strategy. I visited a school in Hemel Hempstead, which took me out of Downing Street for over 4 hours. And amongst all these engagements, on a day that happened to be my birthday, there was a brief gathering in the Cabinet room shortly after 2 p.m, lasting for less than 10 minutes, during which people I work with kindly passed on their good wishes. And I have to say, in all frankness, at that time, it did not occur to me that this might have been a breach of the rules. But of course, the police have found otherwise, and I fully respect the outcome of their investigation. I understand the anger that many will feel that I myself fell short when it came to observing the very rules which the government I lead had introduced to protect the public. And I accept in all sincerity that people had the right to expect better. And now I feel an even greater sense of obligation to deliver on the priorities of the British people.
This does make you the first serving Prime Minister to have been found to have broken the law. It's a serious matter. Will you resign?
I have, of course, paid the FPN, and I apologise once again for the mistake that I made.
It wasn't one isolated incident. There have been 50 fines so far. Do you take responsibility for a culture in Downing Street, the place that you live, but also the place where people work, where people thought that this kind of behaviour was acceptable?
I couldn't be everywhere at once, but clearly once it became obvious what had been happening, the types of behaviour that unfortunately, sadly, we'd seen, we've taken steps to change things. And Downing Street has been radically transformed.
But you did repeatedly say that all the guidelines were followed in Downing Street. That was a lie, wasn't it?
When I said that, I spoke in completely good faith.
The Prime Minister's wife, Carrie, has also been fined for attending the same birthday gathering. Her spokeswoman said she'd paid the fine already and apologised unreservedly for her behaviour. Both the Johnsons could be liable for more fixed penalty notices. The Metropolitan Police said they were working their way as fast as possible through the remaining evidence.
Well, Gary is with you now. Gary, there's a flag flying above number 10. It's the flag of Ukraine. Has that flag saved the Prime Minister?
Boris Johnson was kind of waving it in his statement today. He knows that attention diverted away from Partygate to Ukraine. It was actually the first tweet he issued this afternoon after the news of the fixed penalty notice. Important to say he's avoided a criminal offence the way fixed penalty notices work by paying the fine. The first thing he tweeted about was Ukraine. Talks about it in the statement, and he knows it's on his MPs' minds. They keep turning around and saying, well, the reason if they're a doubter or a sceptic about Boris Johnson, the reason I'm not putting a letter in calling for a vote of no confidence is because there is this vital conflict going on in Europe, and they don't want to trespass on that or take attention away from that. But there are still big problems ahead for Boris Johnson. The event that the fixed penalty notices are fixed to today is linked to what some allies of Boris Johnson thought was the most blameless of all the events. There are others which we don't think the police have got through the pile of evidence on. And when it comes to the police tactics here, that's interesting as well. They always said they weren't going to pay any attention to the normal purder rules. That mean you don't do anything too dramatic, or government doesn't do anything too dramatic in the close run-up to local elections. Well, the police said we don't abide by that, and it doesn't look like they do. So who knows when they're going to announce the next batch of fixed penalty notices, if they exist. And there's another danger out there in the woods, and that's the silence from Rishi Sunak, the deafening silence. It's not like he's not au fait with social media. We think he knows his way around that. This rather suggests that this is a man who is chewing over his options now. It would be an extraordinary but not unconscionable kamikaze act if he were to say, actually, this thing is so enormous, I must resign, I must do the honourable thing, and thereby put the pressure on his neighbour. It would be calamitous for the government, for Boris Johnson, for the stability of the government. There's no sign yet that he'll do it, but the silence is making everybody scratch their head and wondering, well, what will he do?
Gary Gibbon, thanks very much indeed. Well, joining me now from Nottinghamshire is the Conservative MP from Bassetlaw, Brendan Clark-Smith. Mr. Clark-Smith, thank you very much for coming on the programme. You supported the Prime Minister today. In fact, you were, I think, one of the first, with a tweet supporting him. I have to say I'm a little bit surprised because there are not that many supportive voices of him out there. Why are you one of the few who've come out in favour of him?
I think the Prime Minister's done the right thing. He's held his hands up. He said he's going to pay the fine for it. But also, I think it's worth making the point now that there are very important things we're dealing with at the moment. You mentioned Ukraine earlier on there. There was a serious incident internationally there, and making the best of that. Things such as the cost of living crisis as well, and people's energy bills. And really, playing these political games at the moment and asking for resignations for fixed penalty notices, I think is quite ridiculous, quite frankly, from the opposition. The Prime Minister's done the right thing.
Yeah, but he's also the first Prime Minister in history to have broken the law while in office. So, tell me honestly, do you think that he owes Vladimir Putin sort of a debt of gratitude for having started the war that has saved his career?
Well, I don't think anyone owes Vladimir Putin a debt of gratitude, let alone the people who've been murdered in Ukraine so far. But really, the Prime Minister thought he was doing the right thing, thought he was following the rules. We've heard the story about the birthday cake and so on, the very heavy workload, and they thought that no rules were broken. Now, the Metropolitan Police obviously disagreed. The Prime Minister has said that he fully respects that.
They made the rules in that cabinet room behind me. They must have known what the rules were.
Well, it's the interpretation of it, isn't it? And I think they thought they were acting within that. But I think at the same time, there are people who've been fined for breaking the rules. And the Prime Minister said, just like everybody else, if the police believe that he's got it wrong, he's held his hands up, he's paid the fine, and now he wants to get on with running the country.
I was really struck by the Prime Minister's apology a couple of hours ago. He described it as a fulsome apology, and it did certainly sound like that. Why didn't he just say that at the very beginning of all this?
Well, of course, he did this before. He apologised before the House of Commons.
Not in the same way, though.
The Sue Gray report earlier as well. Yeah. So there's been numerous changes that have been made, and sometimes people get things wrong in terms of organisationally. But of course, there are hundreds of staff in Downing Street. The Prime Minister can't supervise every single one of those, but as the leader of this country, he's taken responsibility for that, which I think is the right thing to do.
We're going to speak to Claire Birch in a minute from Cheshire. Now, she lost her mother around about the same time as that birthday party, and her stepfather a few days later. What would you say to her about the Prime Minister getting away with this and not taking full responsibility by resigning?
Well, I don't think he's got away with anything. As you said, he's been issued with a penalty notice. He's
what would he say to her?
He's accepted that. Well, I think many of us can empathise. I've lost loved ones myself. I think we all have, and it's been an awful couple of years we've had, and something that we've come out the other side of together now with things like the vaccine programme and so on. But what I would say is that let's look at a lot of things that we've got right over the pandemic as well. We can't get it right all the time. When we haven't, we will hold our hands up there. The Prime Minister obviously respects that as well, and that's what I think he wanted to get across today.
So his next door neighbour, the Chancellor at number 11, seems to be in a witness protection programme today. We've not had anything from him at all. When is he going to come out and apologise?
I can't speak for the Chancellor of the Exchequer himself. He's probably as surprised as anybody that he's received a fixed penalty notice as well. So I think we'll give him a chance to do that
but
himself.
Do you think he should apologise? We'd like to hear from him today, wouldn't we?
Well, yeah, I'm sure he will do. The same as if I received a fixed penalty for something, even if I thought I hadn't done anything wrong, I hold my hands up. I respect the judgment that's been made, and I would do that. So I'm sure you will be hearing from the Chancellor as well.
And if he goes beyond an apology, as Gary suggested, some people were wondering, and actually resigns on a point of principle, does that put pressure on the man in number 10 to resign?
Well, I don't think that will be helpful. I think the main thing to focus on, again, is the cost of living at the moment in terms of people's fuel bills, in terms of getting the economy back on track. And as we said, we mentioned Ukraine as well. And I think people would much rather we focused on that rather than something that's a couple of years ago now that we're looking to move on from. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't respect judgments and penalty notices and so on and say sorry when it's the right time to do that. But I think there are other things that people would rather we concentrated on now.
Although there's an opinion poll out today saying that 57% of Brits do want him to resign as a result of this scandal. I just want, finally, we've got the May local elections coming up. You're one of the few voices in the Tory party, who stuck out in favour of the Prime Minister today. If those results go really badly for your party, will you regret your support for him today?
Not at all. I mean, we got a lot of things right as well. I don't want to use the phrases about getting Brexit done and everything else again. But at the same time, midterms are always traditionally difficult. I don't think we should forget that, of course. I think with the pandemic, a couple of years have gone by. And I think it was such a transformational election in 2019. People forget that these things are a fairly normal midterm. But I know people have been knocking on doors, been working very hard. And I'm sure we'll do well in those elections.
Brendan Clark-Smith, thank you very much indeed. Well, we can speak now to the Shadow Front Secretary, David Lammy. David Lammy, good to have you on the programme. The moment of rebellion inside the Tory party against the Prime Minister has come and gone, hasn't it?
Look, Matt, this ought not to be a situation that requires backbenchers to act or indeed requires political parties to oppose. This is about the nature of our democracy. Does it matter when you lie to Parliament? Does it matter when you set the rules that other people have to live by but don't abide by those rules yourself? Does it matter if you breach the ministerial code? And does it matter that this is the first Prime Minister in office to receive criminal sanction? All of us watching must say, of course it matters. It's fundamental to the nature of our system, particularly because we haven't got a written constitution, we've got a convention. And so these conventions of stepping down if you're found in breach, very, very important indeed. And for all of those reasons, but principally because so many viewers could not visit their loved ones in hospital, could not attend funerals, did not have parties, birthday parties for themselves, for their children, all of those rules that they had to put up with. It's for that reason, it's simply not enough for Boris Johnson to say, it didn't occur to me, when it occurred to everybody watching the show how they should follow the rules at that time.
But the only thing that matters at the moment, before a general election, that could get rid of Boris Johnson as Prime Minister is the Tory party. And the Tory party seems to have forgiven him. Even many of those people who put in their letters of no confidence to Sir Graham Brady a few months ago.
I think what matters is the moral fibre of the man leading our country. What matters is whether he takes the British people for fools or not, or whether he's actually serious about the office he holds. This is a matter for his conscience. And of course it's a matter for his party's conscience. But he should return to Parliament. He's got to face now the headlines tomorrow and the coming days. By the way, let's be clear. The investigation continues. There may be more fixed penalty notices. There were rumours that there was other criminal acts that occurred at some of those parties. This is a drip, drip, drip that could go on for days. And for that reason, he should step down and draw a line under this sorry, sorry episode.
What sustains you, the opposition at the moment, is a series of negatives about this government. First and foremost, Partygate. But when is Sir Keir Starmer, the leader of your party, who wants to be the next Prime Minister, going to actually seal the deal with the British public in the opinion polls?
Well, look, I mean, opinion polls come and go, but broadly speaking, the opinion polls have now been very good for Labour for so many months indeed. We're setting out very clearly what we would do facing the British people in a cost of living crisis, how we would approach escalating energy costs particularly. We're heading towards local elections. We've announced plans on crime. We're being crystal clear about how a Labour government would go about running this country. But I've got to tell you, man to man, the integrity of Keir Starmer as against Boris Johnson is crystal, crystal clear. And either we want to live in a country that's populist, that's Trumpian, where politicians lie, where leaders lie, and they accept absolutely no punishment, or we want a man of integrity in number 10. And I think that's the issue now facing the British people.
Right. How infuriated are you in the Labour Party by the fact that Boris Johnson, whether you like it or not, seems to be a very lucky general?
I don't like to caricature what is happening in Ukraine as luck. In our system as Prime Minister, you're first amongst equals. It's why, during the Second World War, Churchill replaced Chamberlain. It's why, during the First World War, 3 weeks into the Battle of Somme, when many British soldiers die, Lord George replaced Asquith. It's why, during the Brexit crisis, we lost both David Cameron and Theresa May. During the poll tax riots, we lost Margaret Thatcher. It's because the integrity of the office matters. It matters to the nature of our sovereignty and our democracy. And I have to say, it's a sorry, sorry day indeed when politicians like myself have got to explain to the Prime Minister why he should step down.
David Lammy, thank you very much indeed.
So, how are voters reacting to the news that Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak have been fined for breaking lockdown rules? People in Wakefield may soon be going to the polls in a by-election which could be triggered after the conviction of the MP Imran Ahmed Khan for sexually assaulting a 15-year-old boy. Our North of England correspondent Claire Fallon is in the city. Claire.
Well, we heard from the Prime Minister this evening that he's already paid his fine, and some are predicting that where we are tonight, Wakefield, may well be the place where he finds out the political price of all this. Now, I should say that a by-election at the moment is not a foregone conclusion, even though the MP for this city was found guilty yesterday of sexually assaulting a teenager before he was an MP. So this evening, Imran Ahmed Khan is still the MP here, although not a Conservative MP anymore. But it will depend upon his sentence what happens next. If he's jailed for more than 12 months, he'd be expelled as an MP, and that would automatically trigger a by-election. So I think over the coming days and weeks, there will be a lot of focus and analysis and scrutiny on the views and feelings of people who live and vote here. I think that would be the case of the by-election anywhere at the moment, but especially here, because this is one of the places that was crucial to Boris Johnson's majority. Wakefield had been Labour since the 1930s until that election. And so we've been talking to people today about just that, about their faith in politicians, about their thoughts on democracy, and of course their thoughts on the parties and the fines.
What did he do? Party, 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 party. And it's like still now, we're still dealing with the after effect of COVID.
For Gillian and Sabrina, COVID is not over. So while some politicians play down the anger over the parties, saying we've all moved on, they haven't, because they can't.
We did everything by the book, but she ended up in hospital with COVID, seriously. My ex-husband was on a ventilator for 5 weeks.
How they feel about what went on isn't just about what happened to them. They run a charity for the families of children with disabilities. It makes the contrast with the parties all the more stark.
The thing is, he was having parties and people were dying by the hundreds. And it's all them people who lost loved ones. And they were partying while everybody was losing somebody close to them. How can you justify that, and how can he stay in power when he's not leading by example?
But their anger, we found today, is not universal.
They can't do right for doing wrong, but again, there'll be lots of people that are really upset because they couldn't do the same.
Are you not upset? You don't sound that upset.
No, because I think there are more important things at the moment going on in the world.
How were you affected by lockdown? What was it like for you? What was your experience like?
It was horrible.
And it's that contrast, the parties as opposed to horrible, combined with the contradiction, what was said with what was done, that is still being felt by many. Boris Johnson and the Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, both fined.
So they won't be in government much longer.
Do you think?
No, I think they will have to go, personally.
Doreen hadn't heard the latest on the fines until I told her.
But when you think we all had to cover up and not go out, feel like you were in jail, and then they have a party, so really it's a bit naughty, isn't it?
Claire Fallon reporting. Well, joining me now is Claire Birch, who lost her parents to COVID. Her stepfather died at the beginning of June and her mother died just days after the Prime Minister attended his birthday party on June the 19th. Claire, thank you very much for coming on the programme. I'm really sorry about your loss. Before I ask you about Boris Johnson and his apology today, I just wondered if you could describe to us the kind of funeral that you had to have for your parents.
That's quite a difficult one, really. Our parents weren't, the funeral, we weren't able to have as many people as would have liked to have come. It was a very surreal day, both being, we were only allowed 20 people. We all had to sit 2 meters apart. We weren't allowed to hug. We weren't allowed to embrace our family on the loss of both the loved ones. And adding to the stress and the horrific time, it was just horrible. Funerals are horrible anyway, yet those 2 days were particularly difficult, and we couldn't even hug each other to comfort one another. It was just horrible.
It must have been really awful, and also losing both your stepfather and your mum so close to each other must have been really hard. So when you heard the Prime Minister today issue that apology, was that enough for you?
No, not by far. While the rest of us have been mourning our loved ones, especially around that time, we were all abiding by the rules. My family and I never got to say goodbye to my stepdad Eric. And the months leading up to the death of my mum, we weren't able to say goodbye. The fact that he was partying when his supposed rules were in place it's not enough. A simple sorry to the nation is not enough for what he's done. He's been an absolute disgrace to this country. He's not led by example. And what he said today is just, it's not good enough. Not at all, by far. He's got a lot of things to make up for, and just by saying sorry is not enough for anybody. I'm sorry.
He's obviously not here to defend himself tonight to that accusation, but if he had issued that apology at the very beginning of what we call rather blithely Partygate, do you think that would have made a difference to you?
No, not really. The fact that he was partying says it all, really. I mean, he issued the lockdown. He had these rules in place, and it was one rule for us and another for him. The fact that he did it, an apology isn't enough.
Do you think he should resign?
He should have led by example. I do, yes, personally. He needs to step down. He's not good enough to lead this country. He's made an absolute mess of the pandemic. If he'd stepped up in the first place, we may have been able to prevented some of the deaths. At least it's possible that my mum and Eric would have been here today.
Claire Birch, thank you very much indeed for coming on the programme, and sorry again for your loss.